Murase Studios presents...
Magical Eyes, Red is for Anguish.
Well, hello everyone! So we just got through the prologue, and now we're gonna start the game. For real this time. Let me just change the configuration. I want everything to be as loud as possible. So let's start. I'm happy to be alive. It feels a little cheap and out of place to put it into words, but I can't think of any way to say it better. No, maybe it's more accurate to say, I'm happy that she's alive. My heart is pounding rapidly, as if trying to keep up with the scenery racing by outside the window. That's hardly a surprise, because the day has finally come. The promise we first made to meet outside the hospital. It's just to go for some pointless shopping, but what's behind that promise should be invaluable for both of us. We first meet each other exactly 4 years ago, Matt. At that time, she had already been hospitalized for a little over 4 years. Considering that she hadn't been able to leave even once during that time, except for the occasional short trip back to her home, this will be the first time in 8 years she has done something for herself. I just want to walk in a place that has no roof over my head until I've had my fill, she would always say. That's why just thinking about her current feelings makes me feel light as a feather. And on top of that, the reason she's going out today is for a date with me. I'm so happy I could die right now. The routine sound begins to slow down, and I hear a familiar, or quite honestly an announcement I'm quite tired of. Echoing through the still interior of the car with what sounds like a big sigh, the doors open in a momentary farewell. Don't worry, it's just taking a while to get to the next one. I don't feel like switching the auto speed. I've been coming to this station almost every day for the past 4 years, but today it feels strangely different because of the new purpose for my visit. I left my house both so nervous and happy. It almost made me want to take my time and walk slowly. But right now, even if I tried to hold back, my feet are rushing me there all by themselves. It almost makes me laugh. Yeah, they spelled west wrong. Wast. As I reach the middle platform of the stairs, my nose picks up the peculiar salty scent of the sea. Regardless of the season, when it smells like this in this town, it's proof that rain is coming. The sky must be in a foul mood to stay such an unchanging gray from the early morning hours. I'll have to hurry a bit. Thinking those things, I head to the bicycle parking for what I hope is the last time. Under the dull, cloudy sky, I turn my focus to the usual spot at just about the center of the second row. Not a few seconds pass before I notice that something is out of place. This isn't the first time that I've had my bike stolen, but I still can't help but complain. Why today of all days? I'm not sure how much it helps, but by chance I left home 30 minutes earlier than I'd planned. Feeling grateful for that fact, I start pondering which road I'm going to run down to the meetup spot. Prologue. Oh, this is the prologue. The beginning. Wow, prologue. The red beginning. Whoa. I guess I'm supposed to click. It was confirmed yesterday that the woman named Murase Tomomi had turned into a variant. A Type B, she was moving around the downtown Y City area when caught by one of those in charge of that region. Given that urgency of the situation, 2 more support personnel joined up and commenced hostilities. She shook free easily, confirming her superior strength as a Type B. An investigation by the intelligence supervisor began the same day in order to determine an appropriate way to handle her. The place she had been living in by herself during her lifetime was not one of the new apartment houses towering close to where she was discovered, but rather a 25-year-old cheap one-room apartment tucked away in the nooks between those high-rises. Due to the shade cast by these looming towers, her room remained dark and gloomy all day from morning to night. In the corner of that room, unbecoming of a young woman living alone, what was once a girl lay on the floor as though rolled up in a ball. Her death was established to have occurred 3 days before the body was discovered. While she was alive, she worked at the office of a foreign capital group downtown where everyone around her praised both her work ethic and her character. She didn't have any trouble with her neighbors. If anything, they were rather fond of her. So why had no one noticed the death of a girl like her for 3 whole days? For one thing, misfortune visited her over the weekend, and since Monday was a national holiday, she would have had 3 days off. If it was a weekday, someone from her company would have been worried about her sudden absence, and maybe she could have been discovered before her death. However, even with that possibility in mind, a more serious cause lay in her peculiar relationships. For a girl like her, for whom being sociable and open came easily, there should have been a great deal of information accessible regarding her private life, or so the investigator had assumed, seeming almost betrayed when there were none who knew much about her private life. According to one of her co-workers, someone as intelligent as her was probably living a sociable life outside the workplace as well. According to the elderly, married couple living next door, it's rare for a girl to be as cheerful as she was. There's no doubt she must have helped set the mood at her company. According to the florist whose store the girl frequented, she really knew her flowers. I had a good feeling about her. The more information was collected, the more questions arose. No matter who was asked, they'd occasionally spoken with her and considered her a good person, but didn't have a close relationship with her. Even if they had not had any communication with her for several days, none would have felt suspicious about it. But it's not that the people around her were rejecting her. Conversely, regarding of age or gender, there were apparently few people who didn't want to be with her friend. Invitations to drink with her co-workers after work, or shopping outings with her neighbors. She was the one obstinately declining all the countless approaches from others. In other words, it wasn't that there was something wrong with her character which caused her to remain isolated. It was mean that she had led that kind of lifestyle deliberately. You could even say that precisely because she was popular, the fact that she had no friends who ignored her inclination to solitude and pushed themselves into her private life eventually led her to her death. There was one more unnatural aspect to her lifestyle. Her performance at work was promising, and the company uses an annual salary system. Thus, she was doing exceptionally well financially for someone who had just entered the company a few years ago. In fact, she would have even been making enough to take up residence in one of the high-rise condos that stole the sunlight from her room. Her bank account held an amount few would have imagined, given her modest lifestyle. So why was she living in that cheap apartment? And why had she grown so deeply ingrained in the life of solitude? Those are the head-scratchers that the accounts of those around her give no answer to whatsoever. Ironically, however, she herself was the one who could provide the answer to those questions. Diaries with entries dated until 2 days before her death were found on the rack under her bed. The writing recorded in these 4 bundles of paper spanning the past 10 years was too odd for something you would write in your diary. As the dates approached the present, a trend became clear. There was little to nothing written about her recent activity. Rather, she only wrote of her thoughts for a certain someone living in a distant city. The same tendency is apparent toward the beginning of her recordings from her high school and college years. Nothing but boring content, not a thing about any specific friends or teachers. Nevertheless, anything and everything regarding that certain someone was written about as if it were of great importance, even things that would seem trivial. Grandma. It appears that by the time she started composing this journal in high school, she was already living together only with her grandmother. What about her parents? What circumstances led to the cohabitation of those two with such a large age difference? Nothing written in the diary helps to answer those questions. On the contrary, given the length of the journal and that it's not addressed even once, it must have been something she was trying not to touch upon, or perhaps it was something that had happened before she grew old enough to be aware. In any case, it must not have been of that great importance to her. Over 1,000 pages in all, and every page was filled with nothing but mundane entries chronicling the day-to-day life of this girl and old woman. About how delicious the lemon soda they drank together was. About how happy she was to have her grandmother decorate the living room with the souvenirs she had brought on her school trip. About the first time they made dinner together, and even though it wasn't very good, her grandmother ate it all the while telling her how tasty it was. Wow, this music's pretty touching. These trifling, ordinary stories you could find anywhere were described with such care as if they were sparkling gems. The deep feelings toward her grandmother that this one high school student held could be felt on every page. An almost surpassed affection. Perhaps it was a deep and profound feeling of gratitude. Not that which you hold for a blood relative, but something different, almost as if it were a gratitude you hold for a benefactor. Presumably, the beginning of the relationship between this old woman and young girl was nothing mundane. If that's the case, then even though their world was narrow and peculiar, their earnest love for each other is what brought them together as family. It wasn't until the latter half of the 3rd journal, near the end of her college years, that her life began to change suddenly. She became an adult and began to worry about her path in life, at a time when she was naturally thinking of finding work or continuing studies in her own town. Her grandmother gave some words of advice to her granddaughter. You ought to try living on your own once. Even to a far removed third party reading this journal for the first time, the intention behind her words was clear. She knew she would surely die before her granddaughter and was worried about the girl who would be left behind, so that the granddaughter whom she loved but was not self-reliant could continue living after she was gone. Okay, so we're gonna start now. Oh wow, the music is really nice. She knew she would surely die before her granddaughter and was worried for the girl who would be left behind, so that the granddaughter whom she loved but who was not yet self-reliant could continue living after she was gone. It was easy to imagine that's what she wished for. If anyone else had said it, she likely would have rejected it outright. But the fact that it was none other than her grandmother saying such a thing that troubled her greatly. Several days later, she would find in herself one resolution to her distress. It was one sad resolution that was far different from what her grandmother had expected. She would leave town in order to one day live a life with her grandmother again. A life forever filled with joy and happiness. To establish an environment in which they could live together forever by her becoming more socially and economically independent. She had made the decision which ran counter to the emotional independence her grandmother had wished for. In only 2 seasons she would find employment in a company in which she could expect the income she hoped for. Her grandmother was so happy you would think she was the one who got the job, but though the love they felt for each other was unchanged, by then the two were probably already growing apart. Then spring came. She should have not only had anxiety, but also hopes for her new life in an unfamiliar city. But what she needed most couldn't have existed in that city. So begins the fourth diary. It was already clear that the contents written therein couldn't be called a journal. What she needed existed neither in the time spent with her co-workers nor the time she spent alone in private. It could only be found in feelings behind the short phone conversations after work with that someone in a distant place. Since separating from her grandmother, it was as if she realized all over again that everything other than their little world in which they spent time together was worthless to her. Her grandmother probably misunderstood. What was worse was that her granddaughter probably didn't even realize it herself, that this girl named Murase Tomomi was growing warped. A mind and a wish slightly different from those of the others. When put into words, what she was holding on to might have been a trivial wish that could be found anywhere. Even though many others may hold similar thoughts and aspirations, they are neither able to, nor even try to make those come true. For her, the most sorrowful thing must have been that she was not one of the many others. She held the ability and will strong enough to make pipe dreams a reality. It's a contradictory story. For the sake of gaining a peaceful life with her grandmother, no matter what she would have to sacrifice or suffer through, even if she knew it meant losing her own repose in the end, she would probably have kept going forward. At least she could have done it with support of that strength and volition of hers, affected by her own twistedness. But it seemed that reality was cruel to her beyond measure, for even if she were still alive today, her dreams and wishes would not have paid off. What happened the night of her death? An old woman whom a certain girl would have sacrificed her own self to make happy passed away. Ironically, at approximately the same time that it's thought the granddaughter died, the grandmother, in solitude with no one to care for her, did as well. There was no causal relationship between the two deaths. It was simply that the family who had shared such a strong emotional bond in a distant city had by chance welcomed death in similar circumstances. If there was one difference, it would be that, having lived so long, death was more or less inevitable for the grandmother. Her death was just a consequence of sickness and old age. She knew that sooner or later her flame of life must be extinguished. It is easily predictable that she didn't tell her granddaughter anything about it at all, so that she could avoid worrying her, because she believed that had she told her everything, her granddaughter would have sacrificed anything and everything to come to her side. In conclusion, she had been struggling in vain for her delightful dream that never would come to fruition, without being told the single important thing she should have known. Her grandmother, the most essential element to realizing her desire, had already given up on living with her granddaughter long ago. And then the woman called Murase Tomomi saw the bubble-like aspiration that she had held ever since her childhood burst and vanish. The journal entry 3 days before her death. Though brief, she wrote unusually of her own self. Recently, my migraines have come quicker and stronger. I'm making Granny worry. I should go see the doctor next weekend. That was all that was written. Oh wow. On an arterial road at 2 in the morning. This section of the road had been closed due to suddenly announced construction and is now cloaked in piercing silence. If construction work was progressing according to schedule, the crew should be rushing to complete it right now. But there are no workers or construction vehicles to be seen. Murase Studios presents... Oh yes? There is instead a boy seemingly in his late teens. He has one good reason to be staying in this peculiar location. Is waiting for Murase Tomomi, the Type B variant, and the woman whose body is now her vessel, in order to turn both of them back into the way they belong. And by turning it back, it doesn't mean that he's going to perform any out-of-the-box repairs or healing methods here. engagement, destruction, dismantlement. And given the strength she possesses, he's not likely to escape the encounter unscathed either. Magical eyes, red is for Anguish. It's clear enough to see around her without moonlight, but the moon is covered by somber clouds of nights. Even so, although it's not as bright as daylight, the perimeter street lights offer enough luminescence to afford a good view. He is able to recognize everything from a littered empty can to a tiny rock that is hardly noticeable without an intensely strong focus. Since he deeply understands that the enemy ahead of him won't be brought down easily, he considers every scrap of information about his surroundings valuable. Nice music. Go back to the diary. While concentrating all his attention on his surroundings, he tries to recall what was written in Murase Tomomi's file. On the last date of her journal, there had been an entry about a telephone conversation she had had with her grandmother. Her grandmother urged her to care more about herself. Having received those words, grateful for her affection towards her, she instead decided to put her grandmother above anything else. Conversations such as this must have been repeated countlessly over the years between these two, who cared so deeply for each other. He can't accept the unfairness that she'd been subjected to. How could anyone except her possibly tell how valuable her life was just by reading this series of letters? However it ended, that was the direction in life she had made up her mind to take. But nonetheless, now that her journey had concluded in an unfortunate, unfavorable way, why would she ever need to bear even more irrationality on her shoulders? The thoughts in her mind might have been twisted, but they shouldn't have been something impure that could harm other people. The young man sets his heart on getting his job done. He just happens to be involved in this case, but if there's one thing he's responsible for, it's to end everything once and for all, right here and now, just like he always does. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That is an extremely primitive, simple providence of nature, denying everything disallowed to exist, returning everything to where it belongs. This is his solemn task, and the ashes and dust that he faces are known as variants. They are what excessive human emotions end up becoming after the process defined as death. Just as a light too bright may burn out one's retinas, too much of any good thing can be toxic to humans, even though it have the invisible form of one's emotions. While there is a large variety of forms of or classes of variants, they share one common reason for existence. They only exist in order to make their wishes come true. In the case of Murase Tomomi, the wish is presumably to see her grandmother again. Rick realized everything would be immediately resolved. When you lack intelligence on the opponent's strength and don't want to pull yourself at risk, any way to settle things without a direct confrontation would be ideal. However, it's obviously impossible to take that option here. Her grandmother, the only water capable of quenching her intense thirst, is already gone, and that fact leaves no easy outs for the boy. Then what does he do? The only choice remaining is to break the target down using superior strength. Needless to say, however, strong they might be, fists can never damage something as intangible as emotion, or so ordinary people would think. The young man is capable of making that happen. He is not only one of the extraordinary people who can do such unrealistic things, but also one of the most talented at fighting among them. A person whose exceptionality parallels that of the variants. That's what he truly is. The road that is normally teeming with long-haul trucks around the clock is still shrouded in thick silence. To be more precise, the silence dominating his surroundings has grown deeper than a couple minutes ago. His target is just around the corner, and all other living things followed their instincts to flee from the perimeter. The engagement is undoubtedly going to commence at this place in a minute or two. Despite being in such a tense situation, the young man has already gotten himself ready with a perfectly calm mind. The number of the streetlights in his sight and the distance between each of them. In event, even the irregularity of the road surface that seems perfectly flat, he has a grasp of every land feature in every direction that can be used during the incoming battle. He likes the fact that there are no potential obstructions nearby, such as residences or stores. You could say that this is one of the best locations for his characteristic features to work to their fullest. As long as he's in this well-prepared environment and the target is a Type B, the chances of him going down are slim to none. It's neither flippancy nor arrogance, it's a mere certainty. Not bad! He appreciates how the coordinator was able to pick such an optimal location for him on such a short notice. But if he must voice one complaint, knowing that no one can do anything about it, I wish the moon and the stars were visible. That would be it. On the surface of the dark grey road, he doesn't lament over the cloudy sky for the sake of himself, but for the sake of his imminent target, for the sake of the variant, which has now become visibly recognizable earlier than he had calculated, which used to be addressed as Murase Tomomi. He hopes that unlike her initial end of life in that solitary, poorly lit apartment of hers, he can at least let her see something prettier at the moment of her second ending. Oh, the variant who will never know about his assiduity is now nearly close enough for him to make out her facial expression. Type B variants don't possess their own flesh and blood. They need to find themselves a host. Murase Tomomi has chosen this charmingly short-haired slim woman. Though he only saw a picture of the objective, he feels the two women have some physical traits in common. She seems without significant injuries, but it's hard to gauge how much time has passed since she was possessed. At least her feet are dirty, and one shoe is missing. The two shadows face each other down on the deserted road. There's nothing in their way. The boy and the variant. Which one is the hunter, and which the hunted? The answer will be evident soon. Steadily the woman walks toward him, and the distance between the two shortens without fail. 5. They are a little over 10 meters apart. 4. From this distance, he can see that her clothing is slightly too light for this town and this time of the year. 3. While this city is still in the early stages of spring, Y City, from which she came, must have a somewhat higher temperature. 2. So as to stay relaxed, he's letting some random thoughts come and go while accurately measuring his distance from her. 1. And his inner countdown is about to reach its end. 0. Right after letting a breath out, he takes out running. Unlike martial arts matches, there's no signal telling when to commence the fight. Therefore, the first strike is of utmost importance. His speed is as swift as the wind. If someone without any knowledge of him witnessed this, they would surely describe him as nothing but inhuman. He closes the interval at an overwhelming beyond human velocity. Typically, his next move would be an instant strike to one of the opponent's pressure points, but this time, he isn't going to bother due to the complete lack of input on her abilities and the vessel's physical fragility. The two fighters are already close enough to deliver blows to each other after a single step forward. Breaking off his straight approach, he suddenly switched over to a curvilinear motion and grabs hold of her right wrist. He then uses the momentum generated by the switchover to sharply spin around to the back of the opponent. Now that strikes are out of the question, there aren't many options left. Out of those limited alternatives, he chose a commonly used joint block technique that is boring yet highly effective. At the moment when he's convinced he just needs to apply more pressure, he finds his body up in the air, even though he's the one who took the first move. It was an inconceivably powerful throw, considering how slender the one who performed it is. In spite of the fact that the joint block technique was halfway through, just one wave of the arm sent a man of 70-odd kilograms up into the midair as if throwing a baseball. Reorienting himself up in the air, he lands on the concrete ground as though nothing had happened. He hasn't taken any damage. His impression from the first move is honestly not too good. The target's combat capability is within the range of his predictions. There's probably no real risk to himself. However, he'll have a hard time dealing with the Vessel Girl. He can sense that had he forced himself to get the locking technique done, her right hand would have certainly come off. Her tendons and joints aren't at the level of her superhuman strength bestowed upon her by the variant. Since that's the case, no more brutal attacks are allowed, or else it's blindingly apparent how her body will end up. She suddenly jumps up. Her way of kicking off the ground looks as good as that of professional athletes. Before he can think up the next move, he seems to want to go on the offense now. The interval between them disappears in the blink of an eye, and he can clearly sense her hostility towards him. The shivering atmosphere makes him back off him right before her strike. Her lethal blow punches through air, right where his head had been moments before. Fortunately for him, she appears to have recognized him as an obstacle to dispose of. So far, so good. Basically, once a variant recognizes you as a threat, they will stick to you until you're out of their perceivable range. Since Murase Tomomi's attention is now fully fixed on the boy, as long as he remains close to her, there's little risk of her escaping into a nearby residential street or causing some other disaster like that. In fact, she's now on a stage from which only the winner is allowed to leave. All that's left is for the boy to complete his assignment. She shoots him a range of blows literally without a break. None of them are executed along the lines of any martial arts forms. She simply strikes as hard and strong as she can, but each attack is brutal enough to easily snuff out a human life. While the boy is easily capable of dodging them, he knows that performing those furious assaults must be taking its toll on the vessel's body, which leaves him only one choice. Guess it's about time. He exhales slowly to lower his oxygen level. His next move requires accurate control of his breathing. Riding anything unnecessary from the inside of his body, he leaves his fighting pose and relaxes his muscles. What remains unchanged is a sensation of tension extended inside his body like a net. What he's about to do could look like some kind of suicidal attack. Her right hand, right foot, and then left foot. While that storm-like self-preservation response of hers sees no end, he slowly steps directly toward the raging onslaught, completely defenseless as though enjoying a casual walk. In the next instant, a bursting sound rumbles in the dark of the night. An intense heat can be felt on his shoulder. The attack is a knife hand, a strike that can crack the clavicle and shoulder blade of an ordinary person. The boy's second move is to purposely receive the blow. However, it's a completely different matter from a strategy of losing the battle to win the war. Low risk, yet high return. His idea is the unbalancing technique called twist that works only for strikes coming from above and front. In the course of the technique, the performer's body's functions act as a screw, and the ground is a wall into which it is installed at the moment of physical contact with the opposing combatant. The performer gives their own body a slight twist and creates a helical loop that channels the impact of the attack down through their feet into the ground. The key to success is enormously accurate timing. Quite surprisingly, the boy perfectly parries the impact without any change in his expression. Not only is there no effect on any part of his own body, but even his clothes remain intact. But even if that's the case, the biggest benefit of this shock-absorbing technique is that the source of the impact doesn't take any rebound damage from either the technique or their own attack, which means that he can unbalance her without inflicting any physical harm. The more powerful the attack is, the more unbalanced the attacker gets. It is as good as punching the air with utmost effort. Unsteadied by the unexpected response from the boy, the vessel falls forwards with one leg back in midair. However, physical abnormal she may be physically abnormal, she may be due to the variant's control, she can hardly maintain her standing posture on one foot. There is no way he is going to miss this opportunity. After carefully estimating an adequate degree of restraint, he sets his sight on her exposed solar plexus and then fires a blow. Boom! He hears an unexpectedly dull sound. It is the boy, the one who attacked, that has received a great amount of its force. Unlike his first move, that blow wasn't only for the sake of finding out more about her strength. With any luck, it could have been decisive, but it was completely blocked by a variant part of hers. She returns a right punch to his midsection, but he sweeps it to the side. Before thinking about what happened, he kicks off the ground to gain distance and manages to avoid any further damage. Both combatants look outwardly fine after the instant exchange of blows, but he feels a light numbness in his right shoulder and hand. Had he taken the attack without any preparation and used all his strength, he would have been hurt even worse. Things have turned out well as an incidental result of him being considerate enough to go easy on the vessel's body. However, this exchange helped him understand the strangeness he sensed when he had snatched her wrist earlier. It is another attribute unique to the variants. Their strength are proportional to the strength of their base emotions. Their characteristics are determined according to the kinds of their base emotions. The boy thinks that if what triggered her transformation is her deep affection toward her grandmother, what she has been given as her variant powers is quite appropriate. The surface of Murase Tomomi's skin as a variant possesses a beyond human solidity. It is probably an embodiment of her unyielding, unbreakable will for her deceased family member. She is now as hard as steel. It is too hard for normal human beings to easily crack. This discovery of her superpower means a lot to him. The variant's powers derive from the intangible things called emotions and break down into a number of categories. For one, it is a venom dissolving everything. For another, it is a blade slashing upon everything. Just one single misjudgment on it can dictate his assignment's outcome and even his own lifespan. He tries to put together what he's found out about her so far. Her power is solidity. However, it's no more than skin deep, and her joints and the rest remain unenhanced. And on top of that, he already has a concrete grasp of the muscle strength in her arms and legs. Even if there may be still some uncertainties, he has already learned more than enough to easily checkmate his opponent. That is the best fighting style for him. One who doesn't possess incredible speed or strength. All he has to do is to watch for his chance to draw her into his game plan. The variant has now re-established herself and is charging toward him at an unimaginable speed for a girl of slight build. Her fierce and straightforward approach is easy to predict. If she had ever any experience in martial arts during her lifetime, some kind of fate could be expected, but there were no records indicating that in her file. Once you've turned into a variant, you no longer develop in any way. Your before-death experiences are everything you can rely on skill-wise. Keeping her at the most effective distance from himself, he continues provoking her to attack. If he were to get further from her than necessary, she would definitely forcibly chase after him, straining her body further. Rather than growing weaker, her attacks are steadily becoming harder and faster. If he were to take a hit, it would likely be fatal. Even with luck, long-standing damage would be inevitable. However, at least her solidity power isn't of any use unless she succeeds in directly hitting him. Even if she uses it for defense, it'll probably protect her from things like bullets or knives, but will not be able to stop him. Put another way, this variant Murase Tomomi is no longer a threat to him. Her steely fist swiftly grazes his cheek. Her subsequent vicious blows are all evaded, and then the boy notices a cold, heavy feeling on his back. Alright, should his calculations be correct, this fight will be as good as over the moment she makes her next move. Without ever realizing his true intention, she shoots out a left-hand slap. He lets it get as close to him as possible, switching his backwards evasion over to a sudden flight towards her left. The slap meant for the boy only runs through the air and winds up hitting the street light behind him. The pole is bent over as though making a slight bow. The variant should have realized at that point how she possessed striking power that can wreck steel poles, and how surreal it is for the boy to be without injury despite that direct hit from her attack several minutes ago. Being incapable of becoming aware of things normal people would be aware of. That is one of the weaknesses inherent to variants of Type B and under. They lack the ability to think and imagine. He aims a light kick towards the back of the knee of her pivot foot, which bears all her weight. She loses her balance and collapses. He's aware that such basic unbalancing won't keep a variant down any longer than a breath. However, he has a move that can be executed in a time even shorter. In both hands, he's holding tiny rocks that he picked up at the beginning of this engagement. Taking a step away from her, he hurls the rocks at her head. She cannot evade them because of her fall, but just as with the knee back kick, his goal isn't to inflict any damage, it's to hit the sore spot of her incredibly high response speed. The variants in the middle class or under don't have the sort of intelligence that would enable them to decide to sacrifice something trivial to achieve something great. Just as he predicted, the variant jerks her upper body at an unimaginable velocity and hits the hurled rocks down to the ground, and then with all those supernatural motions, the momentum of her strike causes her to unceremoniously fall to one knee. Most assuredly, when in danger and an immediate response is required, we use our dominant arm. Whether it be a human being or a variant, it is an action based on biological instincts. He has, of course, learned her handedness from the briefing. Every move he has been taking so far is meant to make her completely lose her balance by making her forcefully shift her weight from a precarious position. He moves behind the defenseless woman. He needs to concentrate for about 2 seconds in order to activate a surging power of his own. The variant quickly turns around to face him and tries to do something, but it's already too late. There are no longer any ways, even by some as yet unknown ability left for her to protect herself from what's coming. This is checkmate. Now all he has to do is place his right hand upon the woman straight in front of him. What he's going to do isn't something to be glad about at all. Considering that, he decides to content himself with the fact that he has managed to avoid excessive damage to the vessel's body, except for the joint of her right wrist. At the very moment of his last move, he stamps the target's name, Murase Tomomi, into his mind, as he always does. He believes that it's the very least he can do for those who meet their end by his hands. And then, as if praying, he wishes that she, whose restful sleep was taken by her own unbearably strong emotions, could now truly find peace. Uh-oh, what is he going to do? He thrusts out his right arm. Pomeranian Swingers Fruit Bat Factory. Oh shit!
Good morning 新しいストーリーの始まりフレッシュな空気を全身でスモーキー荷物は勇気と期待無理に胸張る姿がぎこちない日々の挑戦と前頭 ただうまいもっとうまいそんなすぐにやってく
Whoa! Okay, we're gonna stop there for now.